Hello, I am Velina Hasu Houston. I am a writer with the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble's Writers Odyssey Writers Affinity Group. If you want to learn more about the group, please listen to this interview. It's interesting to think about why I was drawn to theater and how it all began because in my family, there was, as far as I know, nobody interested in the theater or engaged in the theater in any way. But I could not know because my parents were disowned by both sides of their family when they intermarried. My mother was Japanese from southern Japan, and my father was Black, Native American, Spanish, and Portuguese. So a lot of things going on. But I do remember at the age of 5 being interested in being a writer. And I told my mother that one day my name would be on a book. And she laughed and she said that Japanese immigrants don't get to do those kinds of luxury things. That comes in the following generation, although, of course, my son is an MD and my daughter is in business and entertainment. But I had that interest at age 5, and there was no theater around me. I was in a small town in the middle of Kansas, and there were no theaters per se either. So goodness knows, but I was interested in writing prose and poetry. And that was from age 5. But so I continued to do that. But at age 11, a woman came through our school system, and these days I wish that I could remember her name. But she came through our school system, and she was married to a military man who was based on the adjacent army base, army post, and she taught English. And she read my poetry, and she said, "Have you ever thought about writing for theater or writing a play?" And I said, "What's that?" And so she gave me many things to read, and who knows, people talk about the bug, that kind of thing. The first time I read a play, it just made sense to me. The world of the play made sense to me. I was only 11 years old, but I fell in love with it. And so I wrote my first play then, and I began writing plays all through my teenage years, reading every play I could get my hand on in the public library, which was not, extremely well equipped at the time, although it's wonderful now. And I couldn't even see plays because all there was a community theater, and they did things like big grand musicals that everybody wanted to see. So, but that was the beginning. I began to write plays in my teenage years, starting at age 11. Fell in love with the art form at age 11, and just grew to love it more and more over the years. It still remains my favorite literary genre. I think I first became interested in writing at the age of 11 because of reading many plays that my teacher had given to me. And that interest grew into an obsession over my teenage years because I literally read every play I could get my hands on, which, and there weren't a lot of them in a small town in Kansas in the 1970s. But that's what I did. And slowly what began as an interest became an obsession. And it was an obsession to the degree that I was ready to leave the state of Kansas. I didn't want to leave during my undergraduate years because my mother was alone, and being a Japanese immigrant from the provinces of Japan, I did not want to leave her alone. So I stayed with her until she met someone. And then I followed my dream of coming to California and getting my master's degree here. And I never left California. And in fact, my mother and my sister moved to California. And I think that once I made the move to California and went through the MFA program at UCLA, my obsession became like another muscle in my body, writing for the theater. It just was there. And I didn't have to think about doing it or make myself do it. It's just always there. And it's still there now too. My writing process is pretty intense. I find that when I describe it to people, they're surprised. They think it's a strategy, but it really isn't, because whenever I want to write a play, whenever I'm curious about a world of characters, I want to know that world and those characters as authentically as possible. And that's true even with my mother, even with my own world. I mean, when I wrote my play T, I interviewed my mother in depth and I think I was 21 years old. I interviewed, 48 women around the state of Kansas in depth. It was a world I'd grown up in, but I wanted to know. And so for my writing process still today, whenever I approach a subject, whatever it is, I do a lot of research. I call it research. It really is just exploration for me to understand something as acutely well as I can. And I'll give you an example. I've been doing for a couple of years research on Japanese and Brazilian families. And by that, I mean families that have a Japanese partner and a Brazilian partner, and often have children who are offspring of both cultures. I think I'm drawn to that because of my own mixed race background, but the research is what's key. And this is what the quote unquote research is. The research is talking with many of those people. I went to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and spoke with many of them who live down there. I've spoken to and interviewed people in Tokyo and across Japan about it. I'm going to be continuing that research in April when I go back to Japan. So I ask questions. I look at photographs. I read books. I go to museums. And that becomes part of my writing process for everything that I approach. Because I feel that if I don't know those elements as well as I possibly can, then I can't really represent them on the page. So before I even begin writing, there's all this thinking and exploration. And then I start to write, and I don't use an outline. I just write the scenes. I bring them into writer's workshop, hear them, go back and retool them. I really strongly believe, as many say, that, playwriting and screenwriting, they are rewriting, not writing. And so it's in the revision process, which can sometimes be a very long process, and I think should actually call for a lot of elbow grease. That's where I find the play. And some plays, I mean, the timing can never be calculated because some plays take a lot of time and some plays don't take as much time. Think about writing. This is my metaphor, that I am taking a big mound of clay and I'm throwing it on the table. And that's just the beginning, because it's just a mound of clay. But the whole process of writing is the sculpting, and the design, and does this look exactly right? Do I need to do something a little bit different with that? And so that is how when I'm working on a play, I think, well, I need to make an adjustment here, and I need to make an adjustment here, and this isn't working, and this doesn't look right. It doesn't even look like a play, So there's all these kinds of questions of process. And I have heard many writers say that it is like vomiting. You just vomit everything out, and then you bring it back in, and I think that is the toughest challenge, because I don't really think one can write to an outline. I think that it is such a fluid and flexible process that when you have to let everything out. You can't just decide in your head, okay, I'm going to use this, I'm not going to use this. I really feel you have to let it out. And then in that process of revising, you will find what really works and be able to trim away at the pieces of the play that aren't working. And as is often said in writing, quote unquote, kill the puppies first, which is that, if something becomes really dear to you, then sometimes that might be the thing that you have to look at the hardest and decide whether or not you need to let it go. I think theater is unique as an art form because it is the one art form in which the audience and the creators of the theater makers, the artists, are in the same room, breathing the same air. That is unusual because if you think about, going to a film, it's on celluloid. If you think about going to a museum, the painting is on the wall, but the artist is not there. In the theater, the artist is in the room. And it's a shared space, it's a shared experience. And to me, that distinguishes theater from other art forms. I think it was like in 1860 or 1880 or something, Henry Gibson said, the theater will be dead in 100 years. Of course, it never dies. And people keep saying this every generation. The theater is going to die. We have television now. We have streaming services, all those kinds of things. But people still want to go into the theater. And granted, post-pandemic, people are going back into the theaters much more slowly than they've ever gone into theaters before. But I hope that that desire returns to its former vigor and grows even more vigorous because of that beauty of being able to be in the same space as the artists. And it's a different kind of energy that's produced because of that. I think it's very true that theater, in order to attract audience back into the theaters and to grow those audiences, they have to be courageous about the material that they present. One of the things that I've noticed recently, and this is something that distinguishes the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble's approach to writing groups. With most writing groups in the city of Los Angeles and maybe in other cities too, it seems that there is an interest in writers who are under 30 or under 25, which is a different kind of ageism. So a lot of theaters don't want to work with playwrights who are older. When I first was talking with the Odyssey, my instinct was, okay, I should provide them with a lot of resumes of playwrights who are under 30 or under 25, because that's what everybody does. But in reality, they were interested in established veteran playwrights. And it's kind of the notion of, if you need to get your car fixed, do you go to a mechanic who just finished school, or do you go to a mechanic who knows his way around an engine? I know my way around an engine. And I would say that all of the playwrights in the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble's writing group, Writers Odyssey, they know their way around engines. And I will take my car to them first if it needs fixing. Well, it actually grew out of conversations that Sally Essex-Lopresti and I had about theater and writing groups. So the playwrights who are in the group were chosen in-house, and I think that they were chosen very wisely because it's a great group of very serious playwrights who give courageous and constructive feedback. So I felt very good being in that group. So Writers Odyssey at Odyssey Theatre Ensemble was a kind of organic creation that grew out of the theater and Sally and myself and our perspectives on how writers could interact and be in a safe space together. So my becoming a member of the group grew out of that process as well. I don't think of myself as a leader of the group, because I feel that all the playwrights in the room are so powerful and experienced that we have a kind of, I feel like we're all leaders in what we do, right? And so that's how we tend to operate as a group. From my point of view, the desire is to create a writers' affinity group, a safe space where writers can develop new plays, and the writers are dedicated, established playwrights, and they are creating work that explores it explores worlds that may not have been well represented on the stage in the past, but also is inclusive of worlds that have been represented on the stage in the past. So that's our approach. And the other element of Writers Odyssey is that we want to be able to engage with the community in terms of doing work with social service organizations. And one of our group members has a long history with, for example, a homeless organization. And that is the type of organization that we might go to engage them in our process. And we don't necessarily want people who are in the theater, but we don't necessarily not want them either. We simply want people to bring their shared lived experience into our consciousness in the group. Granted, our first focus is the development of these plays, but we feel that process can be enriched by hearing about the lived experiences of the other people in our society and communities. So let me discuss the wonderful playwrights in Writers Odyssey. Paula Cizmar is one of them, and she's writing about many, many things, but certainly the role of women in history, culture, and society is important to her, as well as the climate and ecology. We also have the wonderful playwright Boni Alvarez, who is working on a new play in the group that I'm very excited about. Donald Jolly also is in the group, and Donald and Boni are former students of the Master of Fine Arts program in dramatic writing at the University of Southern California that I'm a part of. And Diana Burbano is in the group, Carlos Lacámara, and Jennifer Maisel, Lina Patel, Elizabeth Wong, L. Trey Wilson. So it's a wonderful group of writers, and they have come to Writers Odyssey knowing that Odyssey Theatre Ensemble wants to do something a little bit different. They do want to create a safe space for writers. They want to encourage plays that go beyond what we may have seen on theater stages historically. And they also want writers who care about their communities, whatever they are, because we all don't live in the same community. And when I say community, I mean, culture, different lifestyle choices, whatever they are. We want to bring all of those in the room, and we want the writers to feel that they are safe to talk about them, safe to write about them, and we want to nurture those plays. My hope for Writers Odyssey is that we can be that safe space that we hope to be, and that we will be a place where writers are encouraged to explore ideas that they may not have explored on their own or in other writers groups. I also hope that the plays that we write will be plays that are important to other theaters, and encourage them to produce them as well. The Odyssey Theatre Ensemble is committed to doing a festival of stage readings of the plays that are created in the group. So I'm looking at the plays with excitement, and just hoping that, as we do for all art, that it has they have future lives that will fulfill the kind of writing muscles and writing hopes of the playwrights in the group. I do not know the timing of when the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble will present the plays in a stage reading. That, of course, will be up to the leadership of that theater. But I do know that by we, I mean all the writers in the group, are slowly working on their new plays, cultivating them, bringing pages into the group and having discussions. So we're not in a hurry, because I don't want to hurry the writers in their process too. That's part of the safety, that they can write and be nurtured in whatever ways they need to create the plays that are in their minds. I think it's important for voices of different kinds to be heard in the American theater. I've always thought that, long before the society turned its attention towards issues of inclusion and equity in a very visceral way. Of course, some might say that I think that way because I'm a female, number one, and secondly, because I'm Japanese, Black, Portuguese, Native American, Spanish. But the reality is that our society is multicultural. It always has been, because everyone in the United States has ancestral roots in another country. That has been how this country has been built, except for, of course, Native Americans who were here before everybody else. So I feel that I feel that it empowers us as a nation to embrace all of the different cultures that make us who we are, and that continue to define who the United States, who the United States is. So because of that, I think it's just as important for that to be reflected in the theater as well. When I go to see a play, I don't need to go to see a play that is exactly my culture's. And in fact, I probably would never find that play. I want to be told a good story. I just think that in the opening up to diverse voices in the theater, we hear different kinds of stories. There are so many interesting stories to be mined from cultures that are not, white, heterosexual male cultures. And that is not to say that culture isn't part of that tapestry, because it is. It's just simply, it's not excluding or cutting something out of the tapestry. It's simply broadening it and allowing it to be more complicated, which I think leads, to interest. I mean, in my own family, I've talked about, the ethnicities brought together by my parents, but my husband is from Northern England, and my brother-in-law, his ancestors are from China. My son is marrying into Vietnamese culture. My daughter's partner is Irish and Italian. So there are many different cultures around the table. And that isn't the issue whenever we think of ourselves as a, community within the larger community. The issue is who we are as people. And I hope that we get to a point where that is the case in the theater too, so that people don't have to say, oh, I'm going to go see a woman's play. Oh, I'm going to go see an Asian American play. Oh, so that it's like that. It's like, I am going to see a play and it is about X. And that's interesting to me. And so I think that moving towards that, just like we do with food, people talk about cultural appropriation. And well, a lot of Americans eat sushi and drink green tea. And those are Japanese cultural things. So if we thought about, art and representations in art the same way we think about food, just think how limiting it would be if we couldn't go to a restaurant that was not of our own ethnic background. I mean, who doesn't like sushi and green tea or Mexican food or Italian food? I mean, I'm not Italian. I love Italian food, So I think that we just have to think more broadly about art in the way that we do about theater. I think that cultural appreciation in the terms of how we approach cuisine maybe in the future can teach us a lot about how we think about art and the representation of cultures. I think that a lot of the pushback for that is because historically people from non-white male heterosexual cultures have not been able to tell their own stories, or if you will, cook their own food. So I think that that's part of the pushback, and I completely understand that and support that. But I think that for me, coming from a very multicultural family, it's my hope that that we can all eat at the same table and enjoy the food from all over the place. I first began my relationship with the Odyssey way back in the late 1980s. So I think it was 1991. The Odyssey Theatre Ensemble produced my play Tea. And it ran, I think, for about 9 months. It was a long run for a play in Los Angeles. And at some point, we had to recast the play because we lost some of the actors in the original 5 who were in the play. And then it was recast again and again. And the Odyssey kept running it. So as long as, and the audiences kept coming too. That was the thing, of course. And then at some point, we held auditions to recast it, and not enough actresses came to the auditions. So they had to plan on closing the show. Then they produced another play of mine, maybe, I can't remember the specific year, but a little bit later in the 90s. And it was my play Kokoro, which ran for 6 months. And again, it was a nice long run, many people coming into the theater to see it. And then eventually it stopped for the same reasons, which was it couldn't be, recast. So I had 2 very positive production experiences with the Odyssey early in my career. And so I was aware of them from the very beginning of my career. And then when this disruption occurred in society, where people started thinking about hate against Asian Americans and anti-Blackness and things like that, Sally and I started talking about things. And Sally is a person who is already involved in the community in many different kinds of ways, exposed to many different kinds of cultures and perspectives on living. So we began to have conversations, which brought me back into the Odyssey. And I'd always been on very friendly terms with them. And their vigor had always impressed me, because through every, calamity that might be occurring in society, it continued to produce meaningful theater and engage theater artists. And then I also was impressed with the fact that they didn't have the this attitude of ageism that I had been confronted with at many theaters. So as I like to say that when I was a younger playwright, the issues were racism and sexism. I was always being confronted with that. Those were the fences. And then as I got older, ageism was added to the pot. So it was like between racism, sexism, ageism, I felt like I was always trying to jump over a hurdle. So it was actually refreshing to learn that the Odyssey was not an ageist theater. And for a leading, vibrant theater to not be ageist in these life and times was very meaningful to me. And also there, what Sally had to say in terms of culture, race, and female culture as well was refreshing to me too. So putting all those things together brought Writers Odyssey into fruition. I would tell artists to get involved with Odyssey Theatre Ensemble because I think that by creating Writers Odyssey, the theater has really, if you will, shown its colors. I mean, it's saying we are continually evolving and we want the world to know that we embrace these ideas of equity and inclusion in a very real way. So I feel that with what they put on their stages, who they engage as artists, and now with the creation of their first ever writers group, I think that they continue to do things to say that we are aware of society and we want to engage the community. That's the only way to move forward. Theater, like many art forms in this country, give us something that we can't get from any other source. I mean, my son is a medical doctor, and of course I know that medicine can save lives, but I also feel that theater can save lives. I feel that art can save lives. Theater has a transformative power to come into our hearts, minds, and souls and make us think about things differently. And that is what I have experienced at the Odyssey. I've experienced with productions I've seen, and now I'm experiencing it in this wonderful Writers Affinity group, which is unlike any other group I've been involved in. So I think it's important that that kind of work is supported, and we think about, for example, making donations to museums, to the opera, to film. Yes, those are all important, but I also think it's important to donate and support theaters. And I think that's important because of the growth that they can bring to us as human beings. As a female multicultural person of color, I'm just very honored and happy that the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble has had the wherewithal to create a group like Writers Odyssey and embrace voices that have not been represented in the theater as well as I think that they should have been, given the multicultural nature of this country. I am Velina Hasu Houston. I am a writer, and I am involved with the Odyssey Theatre Ensemble's Writers Odyssey, which is a writers affinity group. My call to action is that you do come to the theater, engage with the artists, support the theater, and most of all, be kind to each other.